Right. Hello, class. My name's Jamion Lewis. Looking forward to speaking to you all about food addiction and overeating. So let's get started. All right. So I chose to study food addiction in hopes to find common personal characteristics of overeating with the aim of aiding in the prevention of obesity. As we all know, obesity is a major public health concern. And according to the World Health Organization, they estimate upwards of 600 million adults are obese worldwide. And so this research study, it aimed to find those food addiction traits. And it's a topic of interest because these traits can be, if they can be identified early enough, then they can be treated before a person becomes overweight. And so that is what the research in this article aims to do, or excuse me, in this study aims to do. So the purpose of this study, so this was a qualitative research study, and its purpose was to explore and discover the personal characteristics for a random population, basically using an online survey that I developed. And so the theoretical framework that was used was the addiction theory. So just like any other addiction, food addiction falls under that addiction umbrella. And so I found through research that food addiction is directly related or linked to overeating. And so some of the significant literature that I found was Wardell, 2013. His article confirms the differences between food addiction and compulsive overeating. Brennan, 2018, discusses effective treatment of food addiction and recovery. The World Health Organization discusses obesity and its severity. A lot of facts that I found through the World Health Organization were used just to show how severe the disease is and how terrible obesity is. So why this research is so important. Shuttleworth, 2008, he talks about the importance of asking open-ended questions when conducting surveys and research through surveys. It's important to use open-ended questions to get honest and accurate information out of the survey. And so that's using the information that Shuttleworth provided. I try to take those tidbits and implement them in my survey as I developed it. So Gerhardt, Corbin, and Brownell, 2009, they argue that research has found commonalities between food addiction, substance addiction, and excessive food consumption. So they're linked, and some of that research was stated throughout my research paper, just showing the connection between the addictions. The National Eating Disorder Association in 2018, they provided specific information on eating disorders to include diagnostic criteria and warning signs and symptoms of binge eating disorder. It's just important to know that binge eating disorder differs from food addiction, and basically that research hasn't been done for food addiction as far as finding personnel traits and commonalities that of individuals that link them to food addiction. So Ogden, Carroll, Frere, and Felga in 2015, they provided the prevalence of obesity among adults and youth. So they actually wrote an article for the CDC and provided a lot of statistics showing who the more obese populations are and how they're broken down demographically. So the research methodology, or excuse me, I think yeah, I skipped. Sorry about that. I skipped some folks. Um, the UC Davis article titled "Research Ethics" um, discussed informed consent, and I use that when making my consent form. I used a lot of the information that they included, um, a lot of details. So basically what I got out of that was don't promise the participants anything that is untrue. Be transparent. Tell them the purpose of the study, what's to be expected, what their responsibilities are, and what their rights are. So I try to capture all of that in my consent form, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Singh in 2014, he reviewed the complex nature of food intake and the various biological factors that linked mood, food intake, and brain signaling. So he really talked about those biological factors as to why individuals overeat. Excuse me, bear with me, I'm battling a cold. And so finally, Lerma, Cabrera, Carvajal, and Lopez Laragra in 2016 discussed food addiction and identified it as a new piece of the obesity framework. Right. So that moves us into our research methodology. My research questions that I chose to kind of guide this research or survey toward was, what are the personal characteristics of food addiction? So are there actual food addiction characteristics that can be identifiable? Is food addiction directly related to obesity? I wanted to know, just because someone's addicted to food, does it mean they're going to be obese? Also wanted to know if food addiction characteristics can be identified, then can it be treated to prevent obesity? So can food addiction be treated like other addictive disorders? And then finally, are food addiction characteristics the same in individuals that are obese? So my research study showed that, well, I don't want to say my research study showed this, but it can be said that not all individuals that are addicted to food are obese. Now, are they headed toward that path? Most certainly. All right, so the research design, it used a structured survey that I created, and I found some good information from Shuttleworth, and he stated that the survey research design is a very valuable tool for assessing options and trends. He even noted on a small scale, such as local government or small businesses, judging opinion with carefully designed surveys can be dramatically change strategies. So that's something that I tried to do using those open-ended questions. But my research scope, my participants was limited. I didn't have that big of a scope, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But I had this in mind when I was designing my survey. I also found through some research that it's impossible to achieve 100% accuracy when conducting surveys, and individual opinions change daily. And to aid in mitigating inaccuracies, I use those open-ended questions to facilitate those truthful responses. Excuse me. And so my sampling information and setting. So I solicited this survey online via Facebook. The sampling method used for this, or for selecting the participants for this, was random sampling. It was open to essentially all of my Facebook friends. So I guess that is one limb fact. But essentially random sampling. I didn't solicit or market any specific individual, and my Facebook has a wide variety of individuals on it. So, and I also used demographic elements in the research for the participants, specifically looking at their age, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, education level, and where they grew up, specifically majority of where they live from birth to 19 years old. And that information can just, provide a background of where they came from and where they were raised, and maybe some of their cultural beliefs in relation to food and eating. And then finally, my survey instrument. It was a structured survey consisting of 18 questions. And so let's talk about the data. The data collection, the goal of this research design is to find those common personal characteristics of food addiction. And the data was collected by the responses given by the participants that answered the survey. And as far as the data analysis, basically the survey period was open for 10 days, and after the survey period closed, I collected all the data, reviewed it, and consolidated the information, incorporated it into my findings. So the findings, on the left, you'll see a table that I created. So I had a variety, you could say, of individuals. I only had 12 participants that participated in this study. So as you can see by the chart, excuse me, I had 6 men and sorry about that, 6 women. So that was a good spread. Of the different ethnicities provided, there were 4 ethnicities provided. I had 1 Asian member, and the individual happened to not be obese, and so that actually correlated with the World Health Organization's findings. As far as a population standpoint, Asian men were less or at less risk of being obese, and so that was actually shown in my SPA population size. African American and Hispanic women are at higher risk, and that was somewhat shown in my study, although the Caucasian women were also obese. So basically, all the participants reviewed and agreed to the terms of the consent form. 11 of those participants were taught as a child to eat all of the food on their plate that was prepared for them, and by not doing so was a sign of disrespect. Now just know that 11 of the 12 members were from the southeast region of the United States. So that was another survey question. Where'd you grow up? And I broke the United States into a quadrant, and northwest, northeast, southeast, southwest. And 11 of the 12 participants were from the southeast. And so one of the questions I asked, are you depressed before you eat? And I guess that was a vague question. 11 participants said they were not depressed before they eat, and the hopes of that question was to ask, are you stress eating or binge eating? And I should have been a little more clear in that question. Also, the majority of the participants, 11 specifically, do enjoy eating, and 11 members would not eat less if they were happier. So that was a emotional eating question to see if they feel like they're emotionally eating. And so these questions, like I said, were open-ended, and the goal was to have them elaborate on each question and expand upon their answer. All 12 participants stated that they do overeat at some point in time. And of the obese individuals, so there were 7 individuals that were obese in this study, all of them stated that they overeat more than 7 times a week. So that was interesting. All of the obese individuals said that they eat more than 7 times a week. Some even indicated that they overeat at every meal. All right, and so going more in depth with my findings, on the left you'll see a chart of yes and no responses. So I had a few yes or no questions, and these are the answers provided on the left. The yes is green, the orange is no. And so some of those questions were discussed in the previous slide, and the rest of the questions I'll discuss on this slide. So it was interesting. Only 2 of the 7 obese individuals stated that they overeat at every meal. So not as significant, but I was trying to connect overeating with obesity, and so the obese members, only 2 admitted, and like I stated before, not all surveys will be 100% accurate. So also noted, only 4 participants stated that they eat a well-balanced diet, and 8 stated that they were outgoing. They were, not intrinsic, but more outgoing. The well-balanced diet was subjective, and so that was something that I could have more clearly identified what a well-balanced diet is. I had that assumption that all of the participants knew what a well-balanced diet is, and come to find out, not everyone has the same definition of a well-balanced diet. 6 of the 7 obese participants discussed a negative opinion of their current health, whether there was something they didn't like specifically on their body, didn't like the way that they looked, or were unhappy about their fitness regimen, or didn't have a fitness regimen. So that was a pretty strong factor, and although I have a small population size, 6 of 7 stated that. So the majority, 9 participants, said that most days their mood was happy. So I was trying to link that to another emotional habit of eating. I asked, expand upon this. When you're happier, do you eat more? And no significant finding came out of that. But the interesting enough, the obese participants ate more times per day, respectively, than the non-obese individuals. And other than that, there weren't any other significant findings with the yes or no questionnaires. Questions. And so for the discussion portion, as I stated, this study did not find the obese. The study didn't find that the obese participants ate. This study did find that the obese participants ate more times per day than those who weren't obese. But the study did not find personal characteristics of food addiction using those 8 open-ended questions on the structured survey. So that was my goal. I wanted to find common personality or common personal characteristics or traits that can be easily identifiable. That this person does this in relation to food. I believe he or she's addicted to food, and that way they can seek the treatment before they become obese. And unfortunately, with the questions that I used in my limited population, I didn't find those traits. Specifically, a limiting factor of this research study was the low amount of participants and the short responses of the participants. So I had a few surveys, maybe 3 that were actually really detailed, but the rest were more, one-liners responses. So yeah. So I found that food addiction is directly related to obesity. So to answer one of my research questions, that quote there that's provided, theories of food addiction indicate that there certainly certain highly processed foods can have a high addictive potential and may be responsible for some cases of obesity and eating disorders. And that there just validates that link of emotional eating. So that is something that's proven. People do emotionally eat, and this research, if it continues, if I refine those questions, expand to a larger population, you could possibly find those traits that link overeating, and hope to prevent obesity from that aspect. Food addiction characteristics were not identified in this study. However, I did find that food addiction can be treated. And so that quote there from Brennan says an addiction rarely resolves itself. A food addiction is no exception. That's why early intervention and treatment is imperative. And so that just validates the importance of this research. It needs to be accomplished. I feel like there have been traits identified for other significant, addictions or disorders, and those have been used in previous research to aid in prevention or mitigate the effects of the addiction. And so that's why I feel like this is so important. Also, all obese participants stated if they were happier, they would not eat less. So, I I guess that was one finding that surprised me. So it stood out. I figured, if individuals, all of the participants stated that, the obese and the non-obese, and so it was just surprising. I figured that, I would get a different response there, but clearly I was incorrect. All right, and finally, my recommendations for future research. I think a future research study to find those common personal characteristics of food addiction would benefit from in-person, face-to-face interviews. That way, the researcher can elaborate on specific areas that aren't responded to accordingly. So if, asking those open-ended questions, you can drill down into the details that are needed to find those common characteristics. And I think that would be best done in person with a structured interview. And then in-person interviews, they allow more, or they enable the researcher to get more characteristic details from each participant. Yeah, that was my research study. Thank you so much for listening to this. I appreciate any feedback that I get from the members, my classmates, and thank you for your time. Have a good day.